What it do, y'all? We are back again. My name is Andru Defeye, aka the Gorilla Poet Laureate, aka the Hoodie God, aka Spittin' Quarantino, aka I wear my sunglasses at night because my eyes are as sensitive as my heart is, y'all. And we are back with another episode of the Young Laureates interview series because it is National Poetry Month, y'all. And we have a very special guest for you. I have the next National Youth Poet Laureate. Y'all know Amanda Gorman, but do you know Alexandra Huynh yet? If you don't, tonight is your opportunity to get to know her. So stay tuned. Before we go into it completely, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors over at the Sacramento Bee and all the work they are doing with the Equity Lab and the Tipping Point column. We are looking for as many journalists from the community as we can give voice to. So if you have something that needs to be said, if you have a story that needs to be told, make sure you reach out to the SAC B at the below address. You can also find me on Facebook. Hit me up and say, yo, I want to be published. How do I make that happen? And I will help make that happen. It is important that the stories of our neighborhoods and our community are being told, and we want you to help us tell them. So shout out to y'all over at the SAC B, and also want to make sure that if you are seeing this, you are following the Sacramento Poetry Salon on Facebook. We are bringing this whole series to you, and we've got young laureates from across the states coming through to perform, to do interviews, and to document the history they are making. And tonight is no exception. You know what I'm saying? This is going to be huge. You will look back at this years from now and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I watched that guy interviewing Alexandra Huynh. You probably won't remember my name, but you will definitely remember hers. So, y'all, without any further ado, we're going to bring our special guest in right now and familiarize you with a little bit of Alexandra's work.
To the class of 2020, I'm sorry our time together was cut so short. I can still hear Kelly and Camilla's voices announcing the daily report. Good morning, Mira Loma. Today's date is Thursday, June 4th, our graduation. And as you know, none of this is what we expected it to be. As we sit at home, it's hard not to think about everything we miss. Our classmates, our teachers, and seeing Miss Chris as you ditched school, as you left on a cleared absence. We were promised so much and met only with apologies. I'm sorry for our SAR shirts that will never see another practice. And for some of us, ball dresses and tuxedos that will never be danced in, and our IB exams that have yet to be refunded, and the infinite uncertainty of what else will be taken from us. I'm sorry if I never got the chance to know your name. And maybe you don't know mine, but I still wanted to say that even if yours was never the story featured on the front page, it is no less valid or important, and your legacy will continue to paint these walls. I'm sorry if Mira Loma never felt like home. If all this was to you was 4 years of structure or torture, I can understand. Not everyone can show up with a smile or afford school dances. Not everyone is lucky enough to find their people, even with 4 years worth of chances, but I hope that you found a bit of yourself. Even if you call it ugly, even if you call it crude, it is real, and that is enough, and I thank you for being. I believe that we must continue to be hopeful, but I will not say that things will get better. Knowing our class, things might get worse, but knowing our class, we will get through it with hands up and hearts first. We are defined not by all of the ways the universe seems to find to disrupt our lives, but by every instance we try to smile in spite of the anger and fatigue. And if it feels like you haven't smiled for weeks, that is okay too. It does not make you weak. It makes you human. And that means you are remarkably capable of love, and you have everything you need to thrive. Know that this is just one chapter of our lives. Know that there is no better time than now to hold on to yourself and those who hold you up and say, thank you. Congratulations, class of 2020. We made it.
Hey, there she is. So powerful, so
Thank
powerful.
you so much.
So for y'all who don't know, Alexandra is an 18-year-old Vietnamese American poet from Sacramento, California. She is one of the 2 Sacramento 2020 Youth Poet Laureates and a finalist for the National Youth Poet Laureate competition. Address her as the Western Regional Ambassador.
You can just call me Alex. That's okay.
Alex employs poetry as a tool of self-reclamation and social justice for marginalized communities. And this fall, she will be a freshman at Stanford University, where she aims to combine her passions for creative writing, science, and civic engagement. Give it up, y'all. We are amongst legends right now. So,
Thank you for having me.
absolutely, it is my pleasure. The people have been waiting to see this interview and to see you dive deep into what makes you do what you do. I mean, you already seen people chime in saying you the whole truth. You know what I mean? We see you, Mama P. We love you. So let's get started at the beginning, right? Like every superhero has an origin story. There's always one of my favorite questions. How do you get into poetry?
That is a great question, and I think it's one that I'm still answering myself because it's going to take me a lifetime to process all of the things that have led up to what's made me me today. And I think the more I look back on it, the more that I realize that poetry has been in my life since the very beginning. I have loved reading since I learned to read. And I remember just consuming volumes upon volumes of poetry books. And then when I started taking singing lessons in elementary school, I actually remember there was this moment where I was like, why do I keep singing songs that other people wrote when I could just write my own songs? And while the song that I wrote definitely wasn't like a Grammy Award winning song, I think the intention behind it is definitely something that I carry with me in all of my creative work today, which is that I won't be able to find what I'm looking for in other people's. What I really need to do is just put my story on a page and have faith that that is true enough for me. And so moving into middle school, I just kept writing songs as a way to really package complex emotions into something that I could share with people, into something that could perhaps bring them comfort or joy. And then in my junior year of high school, that was when I actually got introduced to the slam poetry scene. So I remember I heard over the PA that Sacramento Area Youth Speaks was having a youth slam.
Bam, bam,
And
bam, bam.
yeah, I know. It's just like a movie. And I remember being like, that's insane. What if I just went to the prelims and tried it out? So I prepared 2 poems. And I remember after school that day, I was sitting in the library waiting for the prelims to start. And I was doing that shaky leg thing, you know, when you're really nervous. And I was looking at the clock, waiting for it to be 3 o'clock. And I remember walking to the room, looking in to the window and not seeing a single face that I knew. So I just kept walking. And I remember I called my sister and I was like, Brianna, I don't know if I can do this. I don't see anyone in there that I know, and it just might blow up in my face. And she told me, you have nothing to lose. Things can only go up from here. And if things go terribly, that's okay. I'll be there to comfort you. Just go. And so I walked into that room And it turns out there was one person that I knew from my Spanish class there, Gabby. Gabby, if you're watching this or if you ever watched this, thank you.
Shout out Gabby.
Shout out Gabby. And Gabby was like, Alex, is that you? And she invited me to sit next to her, and the entire poetry slam, everyone was super supportive. And I just remember being overwhelmed with gratitude for being able to be in this space where all I really had to do was share my story, and that was enough. And so I wanted to keep coming back to those spaces, and I advanced through all 3 rounds of the competition. I ended up getting second place, which blew my mind. And then I got a spot on the Sacramento Area Youth Speak Slam team. And then everything kind of just snowballed from there.
So you mentioned them a couple of times. I know them because I'm their biggest cheerleader. But can you tell us a little bit, for folks who may not know, Sacramento has an incredible youth organization that works with spoken word called Sacramento Area Youth Speaks, aka Says. Can you tell us a little bit about Says and like what your experience was working with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sacramento Area Youth Speaks is a critical literacy program that's run out of UC Davis. And what they do is they send poet mentor educators into classrooms. So these are artists that are from the community and understand the backgrounds of the students that they're working with. And what they're really trying to do is create a culturally relevant curriculum that draws on students' lived experiences, and they teach them how to find a sense of agency through poetry. So I initially started out as a student of Says after I had gotten involved with the slam. And then after that, I became a part of their Youth Poet Laureate program, which makes me here today. And then recently in this past year, I've been a poet mentor educator at Miraloma, which is my alma mater high school. So it's been an incredible full circle experience. And I can say, as someone who has been in many of the roles at Says, it's just an incredible experience all around because everyone is just so uplifting. And as much as we're trying to teach the youth, we're learning from them as well.
Mm-hmm. Welcome to how I feel every time I talk to y'all.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
What is so as a youth poet laureate who's kind of just kind of absorbed the scene for the last year, you've been really involved in the inner workings of poetry for the last year. What do you think the state of Sacramento poetry is, and if you had to give us a grade, what would it be?
That is a great question. I would say even after spending 1 year in the poetry scene, I could not possibly describe it in the detail that I would hope I'd be able to. And part of that, I think, is because all of it has been virtual. But from what I have experienced, I will say that it has been incredibly welcoming all around for me as a poet. And it's kind of terrifying when I go into these more established poetry spaces in Sacramento because most of the time I'm one of the youngest people there. But everyone has been overwhelmingly supportive of me. At the same time, I do still feel like there is a disconnect between the youth poetry scene and the adult poetry scene, and I'd love to see more collaboration on that front. So perhaps I would give us maybe a C plus B minus. And that's because I want to leave a ton of room open for growth. And I think that we can get there. I just think being honest with where we are right now and recognizing that, there's been some stagnation because of the pandemic is totally okay. And it's necessary if we really want to get where we're going.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, let's talk about that. Your laureateship has pretty much been in lockdown. You are a lockdown laureate, such as myself as well. What have you been working on, and what effect did the pandemic kind of have on your plans as youth poet laureate?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I became a laureate, I also became a co-laureate with Cloudy, and she has just been my rock through this entire experience because it's incredibly valuable to have someone who's going through the exact same thing as you. to be able to bounce ideas off of, and we supported each other. We wrote poems together, and we were able to brainstorm ways that we could make this pandemic a little brighter with poetry and how we were going to use our positions to do that. So I feel like having Cloudy by my side, we were able to work on, those showcases that we had on Instagram for poetry. And in terms of my personal poetry, I would say the pandemic has been a great gift for it, because since I got into poetry I would call it late into my young adult life, I was always really busy with school and other activities, right? So I would read poetry for enjoyment, but I wouldn't necessarily carve out time to study it. And I think part of that contributed to my imposter syndrome, where as being selected as one of the Youth Poet Laureates, I didn't feel qualified. I didn't feel like I had the expertise in poetry to be here. And I think that the pandemic really provided me with the time to really sit down and say, okay, I'm going to study this poetry with intention, and I'm going to start applying what I learned to my craft, so I know that I'm putting time in every day to become a better poet, so that I can serve in the best capacity possible in this position. So in that way, I think the pandemic has given me so much space to really learn to love poetry for what it is, and it's made me so excited to continue it as a lifelong practice.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to let you continue it as a lifelong practice right now, if we can get you to give us a poem. Because, the audience, I'll sit here and interview you all night, but the audience, they get a little antsy. They're like, "Y'all, I thought this was a poetry show." Also, we want to say to anybody tuning in, we see y'all. And if you have a question for Alex, you can throw that up into the chat, and we will do our best to get all of those addressed to her. So y'all feel free to chime in, and we're going to go to Alex for the first poem of the hour.
Awesome. This one is called Autumn Prayer, and it's about my experience as a student in the U.S. public education system, particularly in a history classroom. It is here I receive all news, old news of the world not my own, but with a passable scent, from an old man with passable pity. He tells me about unit title, lesson number, and I swallow. Until he mentions Vietnam, the war, that is when I really start to listen. If I can't be heroine, call me ornament immigrant. Oh, the boats, and the people on those boats so brave, so different from the refugees now we owed them. I moisten my tongue at the sound of almost home as the name Young Huynh loses its river in the teacher's mouth, and no one asks why my face is wet. And remembering my one sad desk in the desolation classroom, I write a prayer for the children who fill it next. Let the children speak their names as their mothers do. Let the chorus sing it back, or try and try. Let the stories have no accent, and some sounds stay untranscribed. Let the children fill the space with memory. Yes, the coriander. Yes, the silk. Yes, the stomp. The duplex. The honey. The beads. Yes, the asphalt. The drum. The sneakers. The curls. Yes, the incense. Yes, the white bread. Yes, the chain link. The copper. Yes, the stars. The ballads. The cable buzz. The river. Yes, the multiple. The many. Yes, the love. Yes, the love. Let the memories be told by the humor. Let the children know the name of their melancholy. Let them shape the vowel lines, become primary text, and let what they've seen become their language. Thank you. Ooh, Andrew, I can't hear you. Not sure if it's on my end.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay.
I was muting myself so I didn't do like a weird cough or something and like interrupt while you were doing it. You are incredible as per always. And I told y'all that you were in for a treat tonight. There's a reason that she's one half of the Sacramento Youth Poet Laureates. So I want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing in this. You took a gap year between graduating and going off to Stanford, and you've been doing some really cool things. You were just talking about working on your poetry, and that's been a focus for you. But you've also been focused on some other cool things. You want to tell us what you've been doing, and specifically about the work that you've been doing with the FarmLink project?
Yes, absolutely. So I have been incredibly lucky to be able to take a gap year between my senior year of high school and my first year of college. And in that time, I've been doing research with UC Davis at the Environment, Land, and Food Systems Lab, where I really got interested in the way that food moves around our communities and the inequities that are present there. And after doing a few months of research there, I realized I wanted to do more on the groundwork. I wanted to do more grassroots work to be able to see my efforts manifest into real-time change. And in January, I got involved with this amazing organization called the FarmLink Project. So we are a nonprofit, completely volunteer-based, student-run organization that works to connect farms with surplus produce to communities in need. And we were started by two college students, James Knopf and Aiden Riley, in April of 2020 in response to the pandemic, because you were seeing farmers having to bury billions of pounds of their produce because restaurants were no longer buying from them. And at the same time, you have miles long lines of cars at food banks. So there's this huge disconnect between food being wasted and so many people being hungry. And what the FarmLink project does is that we work as a link to fix this broken supply chain where we find farmers with surplus and we help coordinate deliveries of that produce to the people who need it most. And it's just been amazing to work with these young, bright, and compassionate people. And they really challenge me to ask myself, how can I serve my community every day and how can I show up with my entire heart? So it's just been awesome.
And y'all saw we put the link down there. So check out farmlinkproject.org and see how you can get involved with some of that incredible work. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit back to poetry, because one of the other things you've been doing in this gap year is you've been becoming the Western Region Ambassador and a finalist for the National Youth Poet Laureate seat, taking over for Amanda Gorman. So big, so huge. Let's talk about just the process from jump. When is the moment that you find out about this and you decide, like, I'm gonna go for this?
Yeah, I'd like to start in my freshman year of high school actually, because that was when I found out that the National Youth Poet Laureate was even a thing that existed. And I believe that was the year that Amanda Gorman was announced as the inaugural National Youth Poet Laureate. I remember watching a video about it on the LA Times and being like, that is so cool that poetry can take you to these places. And then I moved on because I was like, couldn't be me. And then it somehow circled back to me in my senior year of high school when I found the application for the Sacramento Youth Poet Laureate and I decided to go for it. And I was completely surprised that I got it. And I was even more pleasantly surprised that I could share this seat with Cloudy. And the thing about winning the Youth Poet Laureate title in your city is that it makes you eligible for the National Youth Poet Laureate competition as long as you stay within the age range of 13 to 19. So if you have ever held that position, then you can apply every year until you age out, basically. And so in the fall of this year, I decided to take the leap and go for it. And while I knew that I had a chance for the simple reason that I was applying, I never really thought that I would be here. I kind of just wanted to give it a go, see how far it would take me. And so I submitted the application, which consists of a portfolio of my work and then also a resume that is describing my civic engagement, because they're looking for artists, but they're also looking for community leaders. And then in January, I found out that I was a finalist for the National Youth Poet Laureate, and I had competed with Youth Poet Laureates from 12 states from the western region of the United States, which is still mind-blowing to say out loud, but I'm very grateful to be here. I'm grateful in more ways than I perhaps have the language to describe.
Mm, mm, mm. So what? So there's this moment where you see Amanda Gorman in the LA Times, and you're like, that's cool. There's this position that exists. What's going through your mind when you see Amanda Gorman at the inauguration, and then the following days when it's like none of us can remember anything Joe Biden said, but all of us remember what Amanda Gorman said? Like, what's going through your head in watching that?
Oh my goodness. I feel like that has been one of the many events in this year that I think is just a testament to all that is possible when we listen to youth. And it's incredibly inspiring that Amanda Gorman has been able to get to that stage and to be able to speak her truth. And it definitely motivates me to work harder, to continue working at my craft and making sure that I'm doing justice to my communities in what I say. And at the same time, I also am super excited because I know that this is just the beginning and that Amanda Gorman and I are just two of a long line of poets that extend far beyond our lifetimes. And it's just going to be a wild ride. I think people are finally opening up their eyes to the fact that poetry is such a powerful art form and one that can manifest in everyone's lives because it is so universal. So I'm just looking forward to seeing where the next few years and next few decades, eons takes us.
Right, right. And I mean, you just kind of touched on it, and you've been a big proponent in your entire laureateship. I got to interview you for the SAC B a while back, and you had this quote about youth voice being more than a token and opening the meetings, but actually having a seat at the table. So right now, you got half the city. We got over 250,000 people that we are broadcasting out to. You got the ear of half the city. Why is it important to have youth voice at our tables? And what is the overall message that you have for these businesses and organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I'd like to thank you for giving me the space to speak at all. I'd like to say that it is incredibly important to have youth in decision-making spaces, especially when you're making decisions about their lives, right? The youth are incredibly impressionable and they're incredibly full of potential. And you need to understand that our viewpoints are just as valid, if not more nascent than any adult viewpoint, because we have a unique perspective, right? And when you nurture the youth and when you give them agency to speak their truth, then they're going to take that energy with them into the rest of their lives and continue making changes to solve the problems that we have inherited. And so it is incredibly important to give space to youth to not only redefine their existences and rewrite their narratives, but also to be in dialogue with the adults that have the education or the resources to solve the problems that we're all facing right now. We can all learn from each other. And what I really want is to facilitate this intergenerational dialogue to understand that we need to have respect for each other regardless of our age.
Yeah, yeah. You got me snapping away over here. I don't know if you heard me. I love that intergenerational piece, and I think it's so important. And just as an example, right? Like I learned so much as the old person poet laureate. I learned so much from you and Cloudy every time that we get to kind of sit down and just bounce ideas off each other. Cloudy actually blew my mind during the interview, talking about how they write and what their process was, and I picked up a couple of tips. So y'all definitely understand that we as grown poets can always learn something from this new generation. And I want to talk about that specifically, just this your generation, right? the Amanda Gorman led generation, right? What do you feel your generation brings to this poetry as an art form?
Yeah, I think we are the first generation to ever have so many streams of information coming at us from such a young age. And I think because we've been surrounded by so many perspectives, global perspectives, since the advent of the internet, we are the most empathetic generation to have ever existed. And I think we bring that heart and that desire to see things from a different angle to our poetry. And you can see it manifest in the way that we play with language and we play with structure. We incorporate multimedia into our art form, but also the way that we are able to really tap into our emotions and not be afraid of being vulnerable. And I think that vulnerability piece is something that is really unique to us because we're not just writing about trees and flowers. We're writing about things that truly matter to us in a language that we can understand. And we're not writing for an institution. We're writing for each other. It's this community-based art, and I think that that is super unique to us.
So I love Gen Z. So let's get into some more poetry because we're hitting that mark. I know people are getting anxious. They're like, Andru, we need more poetry. So why don't you hit us off with another one?
Yep, of course. This one is called Downtown, and I wrote it after I went downtown, specifically for a birthday party, and I just remember thinking to myself, wow, this is a beautiful place, and I would never want to stay here past dark. And I think that says a lot, but it'll say more in the poem. It is Friday night, and I'm sitting alone, bored out of my mind, so a handful of my friends and I decide to go downtown. And while it sounds like a good time, I have to admit, I am scared of the faces we will see, scattered along the side of the street like silent omens of the suffering Sacramento keeps. The fatal attraction no one talks about, but everybody sees, yet we still pull up downtown. Not to help a fellow man out, but to cultivate our materialism and surround ourselves with the sound of privilege, even if it is unfamiliar to us. One night in the city is usually enough to construct an illusion we can hold on to until the next time around. Memorialize our paradise in photos and blur out the background, the part that reminds us that walking through downtown Sacramento means looking through a one-way mirror. The homeless look at you, not looking at them, and instead see the words ignorance and fear spray painted on the glass, red letters clearer than the water they drink, our faces colder than that abandoned ice skating rink, the one they congregate in the winter to collect body heat, so we make sure to make turns at certain corners of the street to avoid being reminded they sit starving while we eat, and once we are gorged on American excess, we decide to go on a shopping spree. Head to the downtown commons where it is not uncommon to see those same skinny frames buried underneath heaps of fabric strung together like massive bed sheets. Maybe they are just trying to sleep off this nightmarish reality. While we play dress up to convince ourselves we are part of the elite, our tunnel vision as we stroll down 15th like a neon sign screaming, "Don't you dare interrupt our fantasy." With your cardboard squares held up like receipts of the price you paid when life did not go your way and now you are here. And all you have to say is anything helps. Spare some change. I'm sorry to bother you. It's just, I haven't eaten for days. And for a moment, I can see the broken in your face. How heartbreaking it must be to have your home be the place where dreams are made overnight by people you will never again see because once they've had their fill, they only leave you behind to reuse their scraps to reupholster your life or what little is left of it. Yet every Friday night, I still pull up downtown, not to help a dying man out, but because feeling privileged for once is a luxury I can't live without. Thank you.
And there is that empathy that we were just talking about. So powerful. I hope all of our community leaders, I hope all of our electeds are tuned in right now and listening to the young people. Now, I want to talk because you got into it a little bit. about the vulnerability and bringing out these really heavy things. A lot of times I use the metaphor of like, we drag our skeletons out of the closet to dance with them in this poetry, and especially at the slams. So I want to talk a little bit about healing through the arts. First, I got a few comments that I got to throw out here. Number one, not to be afraid to be vulnerable. That is quite a superpower. People picking up on that. Thanks, Kat. Stuart said, do a poem. Stuart's over here harassing me. Calm down, Stuart. We'll get back to it. And then Brenda saying, Libby Fernandez, thank you so very much. So I want to talk about healing through the arts. So you address a lot of very heavy emotions and life experiences in your work. What do you do to practice self-care when you're writing so vulnerably to protect your mental health and your spiritual health when you're dragging these skeletons out of the closet? How do you take care of yourself?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question because I feel like a lot of youth poets, especially if they start in the slam poetry scene, can feel pressured to process things out loud and to perform pieces that they're not ready to perform yet. And I think that it's important to first and foremost remember that this writing practice is for you, and you never have to write anything for other people. It's completely okay to have pieces that will never see the light of day, because the most important thing is that you are able to find language for your experiences and separate them from yourself. That's why I feel like writing for me is one of my primary tools for self-care, because when I'm able to write out what I'm feeling on a page, I'm able to see it for what it is, or at the very least, physically separate it from myself and say, okay, I'm not my emotions, and I can come back to this later. I don't have to keep it in my head because I won't forget it. It's written in ink on this page. And I think that it's really important to, especially for young artists, distinguish what you're willing to share as your art from things that are just personal healing writing practices. I have 10s, 20 poems that I don't think I'll ever share with the world. And that is completely okay, because I write them as if I am my own audience, because at the end of the day, the only person that really needs to like your poem is you. And maybe you don't even like your poem, but the fact that you took time to write it out is the most important thing, right? And besides that, I would say I think doing a lot of reading is actually a good self-care practice that I do, because it helps me realize that, well, I'm not the only person feeling how I'm feeling. And someone, even if they lived hundreds of years before me, has felt this before. And I think in the process of knowing that you are not alone in reading these timeless texts, or maybe it's a contemporary text, it's incredibly comforting. And then outside of that, I would just say, have a community of people that you feel really safe sharing your writing with, but will never pressure you to share your writing if you're not ready. Make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who give you time to process things however you need to. And again, I just want to reiterate, never, never write for someone else. At the end of the day, all of this poetry is for you. And even if it is never shared with another soul, it is beautiful, it is valuable, and it is worth your time, because you are taking time to process the most important person in your life, and that is you.
Yo, you said so much right there. Mama P chiming in. The only person that needs to like your poem is you, and that's so real. And I think I think your generation picked up on something that my generation hadn't yet. When the slam started, it definitely was about bringing out the most trauma that you could and being the most vulnerable that you could. And I think a lot of times we weren't ready and hadn't processed through. And I think your generation, partially just because of your own intuition and who y'all are, and then partially because of having some mentors that like did that dance and did the slams. You talk about folks at Says that have been, some of these folks been slamming for forever. You know what I mean? They as old as I am. So my question is, and this was a question that came up last week for Roscoe, or I think it was either Roscoe or Georgina, and you kind of touched on it. How do you decide which poems are for you and which ones are for an audience?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think typically if I'm writing a poem and it comes from a place of healing, like it is one of those poems that kind of just comes out of me because I truly cannot keep it in, I try to be a bit more careful about sharing it because I know that it came from a pretty volatile place and perhaps I haven't had time to really understand why it came about. And I think it's really important for me to not only write out my feelings, but try to understand why I'm feeling them and find a way to prevent that from happening in the future if it's not a pleasant thing. So for those, I always put a pause on them. But I would say for poems where I'm like, conceptually, I think this is a very important topic to me, and I've been working at it for a while. It sort of feels like an essay in that sense where I have an outline for what I want to cover and how I want to cover it. Those poems I'm a little more okay with letting go of, with sharing with people, even if they're a little bit imperfect. I would say that I just always have this buffer though for poems that I know were like floodwater poems, right? Like I couldn't keep it in, and I couldn't keep it in for a reason, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be shared immediately. So yeah.
Sage advice. Sage advice. I'm going to take a quick second here to address our homie, Tom the Time Traveler. Tom, it was 8:46 when you posted that the first time. And to answer your question, is this live? We are as live as they come right now. Tom, where did you come from? What timeline are you on, Tom? So I want to ask one more question before we get into another poem, and that's about culture and the cultural influence, right? You are second generation Vietnamese in this country. How does your culture influence your writing?
Yeah. I think the Vietnamese language is incredibly poetic. And I think that having Vietnamese be my first language definitely shaped the way that I see the world because we describe colors with multiple words, and we describe fruits as animals, and objects just have a different sense of life to them. And I think it's definitely influenced the way that I see everything as being interconnected and as having its own life, right? And besides that, I would say my cultural experiences have painted the picture of what I'm trying to portray because a lot of the times in my poems, I'm grappling with the reality of being a Vietnamese American while also trying to honor the fact that I come from a long lineage of survivors and what survival looked like for them in their home country. And besides that, this is kind of related to your point, but I actually found out that my grandfather was a poet, and the very last book that he published was the year that he passed and was the year that I was born. So in that way, I feel like there was some kind of cosmic exchange of energies that kind of brought poetry into my life. So I feel like in every way, being Vietnamese American has just made me the poet that I am today.
Got loyalty and royalty inside the DNA. Come on. That's beautiful. That's so beautiful to find out later, right? And like just all the ways that lines up. That's amazing. You want to give us one more, and then we'll get into the writing process and that evil beast that we all know as writer's block.
Yes. This one is called The Nail Shop, and it's about my aunties who own and work at a nail shop. Welcome to the nail shop. The service never fails. Bring your business and we promise to leave you with fine nails. Allow me to take you around. I may not work at the nail shop, but I have witnessed it. Seen how my auntie's fingerprints have worn away in acetone in exchange for your pristine hands that look like they've never done a day's work, but that's how you like it. Leave the dirty work for the cleaning ladies. They already fling around broken china with their tongues, ought to learn how to pick up after themselves. Con gái này có mũi giống heo. It sounds foreign, so assume the worst and sit satiated knowing their living sits comfortably in your purse. Would you like a demonstration? Here they are, take your pick of nail color and woman, all named Julie, Jennifer, and Jessica, just for your convenience. Watch as they handle white hands like they tend to God Himself, build temples out of rhinestone, plastic stardust, and whatever else is selected from that colossal shelf that spans across entire walls of the salon and says, here, for you, pick color, I make happen, pick color, I make beautiful. It still amazes me how they manage to maintain such brilliant enthusiasm, even in fractional English, even as the greeting bells incessant whine, and the heat of bodies fill the room, and the soaked cotton balls in waste bins taint everything with lacquered fumes, and the patrons get more vicious as day bleeds into afternoon, and the head begins to hammer and hurt amidst the hurricane of noise with their inflatable feet and soggy hands as warning signs of natural disaster, but the only statement they manage to issue is, cash please, thank you, come again. I once asked my mother why so many Vietnamese women became nail technicians, and she told me, it is because we are a hardworking people, a detailed people, who know how to make things beautiful, and I wanted to tell her yes, but we are sometimes a soft-spoken people, a shipwrecked people, who learn to take shelter and weather the storm even after the sun had come out. I can never forget this instinct, plastered firmly onto my soul and sealed in by the kind of glue that holds entire generations together. My hands too will become calloused, veins branching along my skin like the waterways of my motherland from years of labor. I too will learn to build temples, but only to my own God. Thank you.
Let's go. That is one of my favorite pieces of yours, and I feel like it like develops a little bit every time. Like I love watching poets work the same poem a few times, and like you'll see somebody do one year, and then like the next year they'll do it, and I'm like, whoa, that's a whole different like energy to the piece. So, thank you again for that. The internet is. I can hear the internet going wild right now as we speak. We got people chiming in. Time traveler Tom is joining us from the future and says he loved it. He probably remembers when you get the National Youth Poet Laureate title. He's traveling back in time to let you know.
I don't know about that.
hey! We speak things into existence here. We speak in positive. We love all of the other contestants. We just want Alex to win. So let's talk about writing process. Everybody's writing processes look different. Mine is pretty much I just bang my head against sharp objects until something comes to me. But people have different processes. Cloudy kind of blew my mind with hers. So what does your writing process look like?
Yeah, my writing process, I've been experimenting with different techniques throughout the past year, but one thing that I've held on to consistently is making sure that reading is a part of my daily routine and reading a diverse set of books. So nonfiction, historical, like literal textbooks, scientific textbooks, and then also at the end of the day, coming back to poetry, because I don't think that you can, for me at least, I can't speak for other people, but for me, it's really hard to draw from an empty well. So I always want to make sure that I'm reading poetry, because nothing makes me want to write poetry more than reading lovely poetry. poetry that makes me feel seen and heard. So I always make sure that I'm reading 3 times as much as I write, but that just translates to like an hour every day. I'm not writing for 20 minutes every day though. Sometimes I write less. In terms of what I do for writing, my favorite thing recently for writing a poem has been when I have an idea for a poem, I just let it live inside me. And I don't let myself write anything down for a week or two. I kind of just return to it every day, check in on how it's doing, what kind of questions are coming up in the poem, what kind of images, how is it developing, what is the story, what is the cadence. And then once I feel like I have something ready to come out, then I'll put it onto the page. And I actually got this technique from one of my favorite poets, Ocean Vuong. And I've noticed that when I take time to be really intentional about when I'm writing things on the page, I don't paralyze myself with seeing a few words and then feeling bad because I haven't written enough for that day. Because at the end of it, I know that this poem is going somewhere. It's already a living, breathing thing. It has legs, and I want to take time to let it develop inside of me before I start writing it. And then from there, I would say I usually take a week or two. I come back to the poem every day. I workshop it, and then I take a break from it for a week or two, come back to it, send it to a friend. And then after that, I call it done, but I don't think any poem is ever done. And I'm sure you feel the exact same way. It's hard to know when to stop, but I recently got this piece of advice that was like, a poem is done when the very last line feels like an exhale. So I've been trying to work with that.
I love that. I love that. And this idea, that you can't draw from an empty well, is so crucial. That's why I spend so much time out in the city, and that's how I got to be friends with all the poets that I'm friends with, is because they were the people who made me like. I would go to and I would listen to them read, and then I would go home and immediately like stay up for 4 hours just writing stuff. So yeah, I definitely hear that. Any general tips for either young poets or new poets, people new to the game? Any just basic kind of tips as far as being a poet, trying out this poetry thing?
Yes, absolutely. I would say don't be afraid of reading other people's work because inspiration is only going to make you a better poet. I remember when I was first starting out, I was so afraid to watch videos of other people performing or reading other people's poems because I was like, no, I'm just going to absorb their style and then I'm going to lose myself. But the thing is that you are going to become the best version of yourself when you expose yourself to multiple styles and you realize what you like and what you don't like. You have to give yourself options, and that can only happen if you're reading widely and consistently, right? Because I think a lot of us come into the game thinking, oh, I want to write something that's never been written before. I want to innovate. But how can you know if you're making innovation if you don't know what's been done before? So read a lot, read people who have come before you, respect their art, take note of what you like and what you don't like, and then bring that into your own work. You have to know the rules so you can break them, which is one of those old cheesy phrases that I feel like, how when you get older, you're like, wow, everything that my parents said or that old American television said is actually coming true. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel right now. But you have to know the rules so you can break them. So, yeah, push yourself to read.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is funny, there is that time period like between like 18 and 25. It was so wild to me how smart my parents got in that time. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of books they were reading those years, but they definitely got smarter in that time. So now the big one, the big question for all writers: how do you beat that demon called writer's block?
Mm. I don't think that writer's block exists.
You're going with the Roscoe Burnham's ideology. All right.
I think that we have periods in our life when we feel that we can't write poetry with words, and that is okay. One of my favorite poets, Alexandras Huynh, says that poetry is in everything that we do. It can be in the way that you braid your hair, it can be in the way that you make dinner for someone that you love. And I think we need to stop putting such an immense pressure on ourselves to produce as artists. Now, when you're addressing writer's block for a poet, I would say one of the easiest ways to prevent that is to read. And I know I keep talking about reading, but honestly, I think it's so invaluable because inspiration comes from everywhere, but reading especially, it teaches you to focus in on the details. And that kind of mindset will carry to everything that you do, right? So even if you're not reading, are you listening? Are you listening to conversations around you? Are you noticing how the world is changing in the most minute ways? And I think that everything that you write has the potential to be a poem, even if it doesn't sound perfect right now. So taking that pressure off of yourself to produce a poem every time you sit down to write, I think is going to relieve that writer's block, because writer's block is just the illusion I think that you put on yourself when you don't produce a poem as quickly as you would like to, but that never takes away your ability to write. I think your the agency that you have with words, the ability to choose words is such a privilege, and no one can ever take that away from you. So you will never have writer's block. You'll just have dry spells or non written language poetry moments.
Mm. I love it. I love it. Yeah, Roscoe had some very similar thoughts on. He was just like, I just tell people writer's block doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna need to go a little deeper on that. And he definitely did. So as we're wrapping up and we're talking about reading and making sure you're getting your fill of poetry, who are some poets that people should check out during Poetry Month? Who are your now? Also, I want to say that you can get a bunch more of Alex and Cloudy's recommendations right now on the Sacramento Poetry Center. They have taken over the Poetry Center social media for the month, so they're putting a bunch of their poems and poems that inspire them and artists that they love up on the site. So that's really dope. So make sure you go follow the Sacramento Poetry Center. But now, who would you recommend? Who are you currently reading? Who's currently inspiring you? What's on your plate?
Yeah. So I just finished the book Ghost of by Diana Coy Nguyen, and she is such an amazing poet because she truly learns how to fill silence and emptiness in words with meaning. She literally formats her writing to fit a void that is cut out of a photo, and she pairs it with photos of her family. So I think that she just has an incredible way of experimenting with the visual aspect of poetry, and she takes a completely new stance on the art form because I think in Western culture, everyone is always like, you have to say something to be loud. You just have to say whatever you want. But the thing is that I think in Eastern culture, we understand that there's a lot of meaning in silence, and she explores that silence in a way that I haven't seen before. And then on top of that, I would highly recommend Safia El Helov. She has the most amazing poetry about finding your identity as an American and as an immigrant, and the way that she navigates her fragmented identity as a map. The literal geographic map is so beautiful. And then I would also recommend Araceli Girmay. She has such a tender way of writing that makes you just want to stop and smell the roses, like literally smell the roses.
Mm-hmm.
And then last one, Vijay Seshadri, Three Sections. I believe it's his Pulitzer-winning prize book, and he He's so funny. I love funny poets. He's incredibly dry, and he asks these really interesting philosophical questions in the quirkiest way. So I highly recommend if you want someone to give you a very non-romantic kind of poetry.
That sounds right up my alley. So let's see. Can we get one more piece from you before we get out of here?
Yes, you can. I have this poem called Inheritance, and it is another reflection poem that I wrote about the pandemic, particularly about my journey as an individual. So, inheritance. These days, I welcome the silence, feel the earth hold me. Even in the absence of sound, I'm still listening to all the stories still called fiction. I carve them on the pavement so you may know which way is home. Or else, I let the noise be noise and do not use obligation as distraction. I am not appliance, no domestic creature meant to serve. I am a person. I am a person. There is a word for how I feel, and I am not afraid to know its name. My mind is not a prison, but a prism, and I have learned that shadows are a given in the presence of unspeakable light, and my days are not tallied though they are numbered. So I count my kindnesses and say love more than goodbye. I count my meals instead of the weight I carry. I carry what is useful forward. A few things I've gathered. Socks are still socks, even if mismatched. Everything I was told about a clean room was true. You can still see a smile under a mask. The way I speak to myself is the way I speak to you. I should unmute myself more often. I need water more than I recall. The people in this room can also smile. The people in this room are also people, and even as I untether myself from this built world, I know I exist. The battles continue where my feet stand. I need no pictures to prove it. The celebrations live inside my bloodline. I need no ribbon to prove it. I am already a triumph. Every day I breathe. And years from now, when I become ancestor, I will tell them all about the courage of distance, how we learn to hold space instead of hands. I will tell them about the color of courage, how loss echoed through an entire generation and the children became teachers. Learned love is not defined by age. I will tell them of this land. We ripped from a people we can never repay, but we will try and try. I will tell them about the way a footstep can be felt on the other side of the planet. So mind your soul. Move only in truth. You have inherited this silence. Now make it sing. Thank you.
Wow. That is my favorite pandemic poem that I have heard yet. Y'all got some big shoes to fill if you coming at me with that pandemic poetry. Mama P says the same thing. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Lillian says she loves you so much.
Yeah.
The comments keep coming in, and this is one that I wanted to make sure that got brought up and just got some attention. The youth are teaching us the way we wrote for scores. The youth write for truth. Like, so big, so big, so big, so big. And we appreciate y'all so much. Please let us audience share this poem with Luther Burbank students tomorrow so they may also travel in time. I mean, it's up on all of these sites, the Crockers website or the Crockers Facebook, the SAC B Facebook. We all over the place. So, if you want to share this, you can definitely do that. Any parting words? Any last words while you got? We got 250,000 people tuning in all around the city. We got half the city watching this right now. What do you want to leave the people with?
Yeah. I want to say, and I want to remind everyone that I am not exceptional. There are thousands of other young poets who are writing just as thought-provokingly and just as powerfully, if not more so than I am, from their bedrooms, from their classrooms, in hidden notebooks. And we just need to give them the space and resources to do so. So keep listening for youth, keep giving them platforms to speak, And you will only see more of people like me and people who can bring things that I can't bring to the table, because we need to build this movement as much as possible and know that we are stronger when we have more voices coming to the stage. So.
Oh, oh, she's so good. It brings a tear to my eye, y'all. And make sure, if you want to support the young people and the young poets, make sure that you check out youthspeaks.org. Sacramento area Youth Speaks. Cannot say enough about Mama P and the whole crew over there and all that they do and have been doing for the young people, including putting together the Youth Poet Laureates, the whole thing. So yeah, this is the promise of 916. Bless you. Bless you. So Time Traveler Tom also wanted to know what the title of that last poem was.
Yes, that title is called Inheritance.
Inheritance. Yeah. A light of this world, blessings on blessings. Yeah, the reviews are in. We love us some Alex, and she real humble, and she's about as real as it comes. So I need everyone within earshot, within eye shot. I need you to just close your eyes real quick and picture when she gets handed that title of National Youth Poet Laureate. You know what I mean? We're just going to visualize this into existence, because this is the voice that our country needs right now, right? It's like it would be an honor for us as Americans to be represented by you. So we just want to make sure that you know how supported you are in the community, and you can stay humble, but I'm a brag like extra about you. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's it. This is the promise of all says people. Yeah, get to know Sacramento area Youth Speaks. And I think that brings us to the end. I think we did it. I think we successfully had an interview. We talked about all the things, not all the things. And I still I could go for another hour long of this poetry. But y'all make sure you tune in to all of the social media where Alex is, and find out where she's going to be when the world opens back up. I'm sure she'll be around doing some poems here and there. I know that she's going to be around doing poems here and there, because I'm going to ask her to do a bunch of poems with me at a few places. So y'all make sure that you tune in to whatever she's doing. Make sure you support Sacramento area Youth Speaks, and make sure you keep writing, y'all. It is still National Poetry Month. We still believe in you. And, for Alexandra Huynh, my name is Andru Defeye, and I love you, and you can't do shit about it.